Good afternoon, everyone. If you could take a seat and we could get started, would appreciate it. We're going to start this afternoon with the Department of Labor. Correct? And we have Emily Haskell as our budget analyst. Go ahead, Emily.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the budget analysis for the Maryland Department of Labor. In the budget summary on page 1, you can see that labor's budget totals about $554 million in fiscal 2024, which is a decrease of nearly 14%, mostly due to the end of COVID-19 federal relief and other federal grants. I'm going to skip ahead to page 10 and talk about the electronic licensing modernization IT project. This is the second attempt to complete the project after the first began in fiscal 2019, but stalled, and the vendor eventually declaring bankruptcy last year. The fiscal 2024 allowance includes $2.8 million in special funds for the project. And in addition, $2 million is expected to be provided in fiscal 2023 from funding remaining from the prior attempt. Funding for the project comes from revenues and fund balance from various occupational licensing boards and commissions. And the cost estimates for the project range from $6 million to over $9 million. The department has identified sufficient funding as a potential risk for completing the project, and DLS has asked the department to comment on the anticipated overall costs, as well as how the project would be completed if licensing board revenues are insufficient. In addition, given the lack of planning currently completed for the project, DLS is recommending that funding for the project be restricted until the department provides a report documenting the requirements, vendor selection process, costs, and implementation timeline. The first issue in the analysis relates to unemployment insurance, beginning on page 13. As you're all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic led to historic UI claims volume, as well as several new federal programs that expanded eligibility and provided supplemental benefits. Exhibit 5 shows the continued claims volume for all programs over the last few years, with the regular UI claims represented by the darker blue. You can see regular claims have returned to levels consistent with before the pandemic. However, in Exhibit 6 on page 14, you can see that despite the claims volume going back down, the department is still struggling to get back on track to meeting the established timeliness standard of paying 87% of claims within 3 weeks, achieving less than 60% in each of the last few months. The department also tracks internally the percent of claims for which a determination has been made within 3 weeks, with a goal of 92%, but the department has also not met this goal since October 2022. In Exhibit 7 on page 15, you can also see the timeline for processing UI appeals cases has also slowed in fiscal 2022. The next exhibit, Exhibit 8 on page 16, shows UI-related contract costs since fiscal 2021. The department spent more than $250 million across fiscal 2021 and 2022 on contracts for call center staffing, adjudicating claims, and dealing with increased fraud. This chart shows that the working appropriation and allowance have not accurately reflected the cost of the UI program in recent years, although contract costs are generally expected to decrease along with the claims volume. Exhibit 9 on page 17 shows the staff resources provided under these contracts for adjudication services and to staff the call center, which have decreased significantly in the last year. Total vendor staff peaked at more than 2,200 in January 2022, and by December, the department was using just over 300 vendor staff in the call center. This is in addition to about 320 filled regular positions for the UI program, which represents a vacancy rate of 14%. As well as about 100 contractual full-time equivalent positions. The call center contract is in place through December 2023, and the department is working on a new procurement for ongoing call center support to provide flexible staffing up as needed. Funding for administering the UI program is typically provided by the U.S. Department of Labor. However, this funding has been insufficient to cover costs of administering the program in recent years, with the department using $15 million in general funds to make up the difference in fiscal 2022, as well as about $24 million in American Rescue Plan funding provided so far in fiscal 2023. DBM has set aside an additional $26 million in American Rescue Plan funds in case it's needed. And the department also estimates that an additional $16 million may be needed by the end of federal fiscal 2023. And DLS has asked the department to comment on the anticipated need for continued state support for the UI program in the current and upcoming years. One last thing about UI, there were 2 audits that were released in the last year that included findings related to lack of procedures for identifying fraudulent or duplicate payments and the lack of adequate review and oversight. Due to the number of repeat audit findings, DLS recommends standard language restricting funding until the Office of Legislative Audit submits a report on the corrective actions taken by the department. The second issue in the analysis relates to the expansion of funding for apprenticeship programs. The fiscal 2023 budget included $25 million in general funds in the dedicated purpose account to be expended over multiple years to support the expansion of apprenticeship programs. In December, a budget amendment was processed to transfer the first $5 million of that to the department, and Exhibit 10 on page 20 shows the department's proposal to make use of this initial funding for initiatives that support a growing pool of employers sponsoring apprenticeships, to increase occupational and demographic diversity among apprentices, and to improve engagement with educational institutions. SB 104 and 413 would establish an Apprenticeship 2030 Commission to study and make recommendations on the expansion of apprenticeship programs. And if enacted, the recommendations of this commission could also guide the use of this funding. The third issue and the analysis relates to COVID-19 relief funding for workforce development. Exhibit 12 on page 24 shows that the state has allocated significant additional federal funds from the American Rescue Plan, totaling $82 million since fiscal 2021. And this is on top of the regular funding, federal funds from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Most of this funding is distributed to local workforce areas to provide career services, training, and other supportive services for job seekers. The American Rescue Plan funding is generally more flexible than the regular Workforce Opportunity Act funding, and each local area submits quarterly program and fiscal reports to the department on how the American Rescue Plan funding is being used. Local areas report directing funding to serve populations disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, to support pandemic impacted small businesses through wage subsidies, and to provide training in impacted or high growth sectors such as healthcare, biotechnology, and information technology. Exhibit 13 on page 26 shows the progress each local area has made in expending the funding from the fiscal 2022 round of $37.5 million. Obligation rates from this funding range from 0% in Baltimore County, although the county has expended nearly all of its fiscal 2021 funding, to 94% in Baltimore City. Low obligation rates are not necessarily a concern for this funding, as it may take time for local areas to set up new programs to make use of this one-time opportunity for flexible funds. Finally, I'm going to turn to the final issue in the analysis, which is the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program, known simply as FAMLY. Chapter 48 of 2022 established the FAMLY program to provide up to 12 weeks of benefits. Generally, employers with 15 or more employees must contribute to and participate in the program. Under current law, contributions are set to begin this coming October, with claims for benefits starting in January 2025. Exhibit 14 on page 28 shows cost estimates produced by various consultants engaged by the department, as well as estimates of claims volume. Estimated total program expenditures, including both administrative costs and benefits payments, range from $1.5 billion to $2.1 billion annually over the first few years of program implementation. Startup costs for the department are estimated at $60 million across calendars 2023 and 2024. However, the fiscal 2023 budget includes only $10 million, and no funding is provided in the fiscal 2024 allowance. DLS has engaged a contractor to study various administrative models that could be adopted and the costs associated with each, and the study is expected to be published soon. Potential models include the department administering the family program directly, contracting with a third party to manage the program, or a blended approach. Generally, it's anticipated that benefits of outsourced program management would include a shorter startup timeline, as well as lower startup costs, while drawbacks would include a loss of control over the development of program procedures. In addition to administrative expenses, the state will also incur costs under the family program related to employer contributions for state employees, employer contributions on behalf of community providers, and employee contributions for employees making less than $15 per hour. Exhibit 15 on page 30 shows the estimates of these costs in fiscal 2025. As you can see, contributions paid by the state could range from $53 million to over $120 million, depending on the cost share between employers and employees. Finally, pages 31 and 32 show the DLS recommended language related to the unemployment insurance audit, as well as the recommendation to restrict funds for the electronic licensing modernization project. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good job, Emily. We are going to try and keep this to, I'm trying to do a half hour for each of the agencies this afternoon because I have another meeting at 2 o'clock that I really need to get to. So Secretary Wu, come on up to the table and welcome for your first time, and I promise we'll be easy on you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the members of the committee. I'll try to be swift, given our time constraints today. I want to thank Ms. Emily Haskell for her thorough analysis. I'm joined today by Lakivu Speaks, the Acting Assistant Secretary for Unemployment Insurance, and also my senior leadership team is here to answer further questions. I wanted to just take a minute to talk about some of the key priorities I have for the department, since it's my first time before the committee, and how I think the department's work is integral to the governor's work to leave no one behind. That includes opening doors to opportunity through workforce, career and technical education, apprenticeship, and occupational and professional licensing, ensuring clear standards and robust enforcement through the Division of Labor and Industry, administering programs that support workers and their families, including unemployment insurance and soon paid family and medical leave. All of this relies on rebuilding our agency's workforce and ensuring we have sufficient resources to accomplish this mission, and also to respond to our stakeholders in a more transparent and responsive way. While the DLS analysis certainly points to areas for improvement, I'm also grateful it highlights some of the department's key initiatives. That includes many of our workforce initiatives, the Jobs That Build program. We've obligated all 15 million of that money across this to 62 businesses across the state in all 24 jurisdictions, supporting 2,600 infrastructure workers and hundreds of infrastructure projects. We're working on the $23 million Good Jobs Challenge, which was funded by the federal government to support offshore wind, and anticipate that will help us train 4,000 individuals in this growing industry. And finally, we've reached a historic milestone on registered apprenticeships of 12,000 at the end of 2022. I want to thank the General Assembly for the targeted and flexible resources to enable this expansive approach to workforce. With labor and industry, many of the high-profile laws that have passed in the last few seasons are housed there. We know we have more work to do to fill vacancies and address capacity. We have significantly increased our bilingual capacity on the wage and hour side and look to make similar strides with MOSH. In occupational and professional licensing, we have over 21 appointed boards and commissions that license, regulate, and monitor over 270,000 licensees. The division is working to balance high standards for licensure and eliminating barriers to entry in specific professions and occupations, especially for immigrants and minorities. And finally, the Office of Financial Regulation is continuing its efforts to modernize practices to better protect consumers, increase access to our financial system, and promote compliance in an evolving financial services industry. I want to specifically address some of the concerns raised by DLS. You have our written comments, but in brief, on the electronic licensing modernization initiative, that's very important, and we think will greatly increase convenience as well as access for individuals in regulated occupations. We recognize the need for having a detailed plan to make that process efficient and cost effective, and so we'll be coming back to you with that plan. On unemployment insurance. I know this is one of my biggest challenges in the department. It's also one of my top priorities. We are working with the Office of Legislative Audits to resolve the audit findings and are close to achieving that. I want to be clear, though, that the UI program still faces serious challenges, and Ms. Haskell identified some of the difficulties we're facing in terms of workload and falling behind, frankly, on meeting our targets. While the department was able to address some of the most urgent needs during the pandemic, there are significant bottlenecks and backlogs in some areas. Those include cases where claimants have been flagged for identification discrepancies and possible fraud, as well as delays in recovering contributions from employers who should have been making contributions but didn't. And there are nearly 10,000 cases pending appeal. Addressing the deficiencies in our current systems, as well as reducing complexity, making sure the system is more user-friendly and solvent, and ensuring individuals' valid claimants aren't continually delayed and denied because of security screens. This is all important work that needs to be done, and we will need the resources to do it. Unfortunately, we're seeing a very sharp decline in federal administrative funding. As was highlighted, UI projects a total of $42.2 million in state revenue is required to cover operating expenses in fiscal year 2023. That includes the DBM set aside of ARPA funds and $16.1 million in additional funding. We're working closely with the Department of Budget and Management to monitor this and to explore options to address any shortfalls. We are planning to reduce our spending in FY24 as discussed. We are just getting a new contract in place to allow us to reduce our dependency on the virtual call center vendor contract. So we do expect that we will be ramping down costs, but one of the issues is that federal support is also decreasing faster. So that means, and frankly, this is not just a problem for this fiscal year. It is one, unfortunately, we do see shortfalls in FY24 and FY25, and that assumes no further unforeseen shocks to the economy, which could frankly make the situation more pronounced. Finally, I do want to note on paid leave. We are very grateful for the $10 million that has been released thus far. But as was noted, if it's going to cost $60 million to operate the program, even if there is some form of delay, which I know the legislature is contemplating, we will need to have the IT systems in place, the personnel in place, and have significant ramp up over the next several months in order to begin to educate employers and be ready to receive contributions and make sure everything goes smoothly. So we will have to talk about what additional funds we needed. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. When I look back at what a hard year it was with the unemployment, it was just such an enormous load that I honestly think that we've made huge strides. We may still have a few things to work out, but things are sure a whole lot better than they were, because people in the department worked so many hours and worked so hard, and I don't think that the general public really realized all the effort, the work that department was doing through it all. It wasn't like anybody was sleeping through it. They were sure working hard. So I commend the department for as far as they've come, and just look forward to things getting smoothed out for you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it and appreciate your support.
Are there any comments from the committee? Senator Benson?
Good afternoon. I have a couple of questions. Number one is from what we are hearing, there are some problems with privatization and the outsourcing in your department. We are having some issues with the absence of personnel working with pens. Are you all working on additional pens so that we will not have to deal with the outsourcing and privatization?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. This is something, first of all, Governor Moore has made clear that rebuilding government and rebuilding state government is important. This is something we are very focused on at the Department of Labor. We do have many people who are working on contract, and it's important that we provide opportunities, if we can, to bring those individuals in as full-time employees and use the pins that are available. Sadly, we have lost a number of pins from the department in recent years, even as our mission has continued to increase. And as we face threats like an unemployment insurance of cyber attacks and fraud that frankly were not contemplated when federal levels or state levels of funding or personnel were set many years ago. So we absolutely are focused on that. We'll be coordinating with the governor's team and DBM, of course, to understand better as I get further into the job what additional person power we may need, but certainly, especially where we have federally funded programs, this is something we're looking to do, is try to make sure that we have the in-house personnel available to do that work. It's very important.
Is the fact that the salaries for the employees is somewhat of a problem. You know, they have not received adequate pay. Their steps have been ignored. It's a problem. And that's why you're not able to keep the qualified, hardworking employees on the job because of the pay. So I rather, and when you talk about contracts, that is very much of a troubling piece for me personally, because when you talk about contracts, those people who come on board to work do not have leave, they don't have insurance, and I don't have to talk to you about contracts. That's a problem. And outsourcing is another problem. So if I could, I'm just trying to figure out how I know that you're coming into a real challenge because we have been inundated with complaints from our citizens regarding this whole issue of unemployment insurance. I mean, the time limit, I mean, it's a big problem. And I know that you all have a lot to do, but those are the things that I think you need to look at.
Thank you. And we'd be happy to follow up with you and your staff in further detail.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're good with you. I've got 3 more people here on the list. Don't know who wants to come up and say something. I have Gregory Morgan.
I think we just put everyone on the list in case we wanted, there were
Okay.
any questions that
All
need
right.
to be answered.
How about Mike Hopkins? He's like the star of the show.
Do you have questions for Mr. Hopkins?
No.
Okay. All right.
I think we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Denise Gilmore, is she here? Did she wanted to speak? I almost missed you.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm the Legislative Director with AFSCME Council 3. In the interest of time, I promise I will be very short as well. I just really wanted to reiterate that we look forward to working with the new Labor Secretary and this administration and this committee with doing everything we can to make sure the Department of Labor lives up to its mission. It's an incredibly diverse agency, as you said, Madam Chair, with truly incredible employees who've been working their hearts out these last few years, and they're to put the perspective of PINs, and we submitted written testimony that I encourage you to look at. The Department of Labor is one of the agencies that has seen a tremendous amount of PIN reductions over the last several years. They absolutely will need more staff. I think there are opportunities for cross-training. I think we can look at the implementation of paid family leave. Thank you to the analyst. I just put the connection together that this is family. It's actually great. But I think for family, look, we absolutely need state employees that are merit employees that are going to be responsible for looking at these claims. Their only interest when they look at claims is, are we following the law? Are we not? There aren't any additional pressures from, company that may have profit motives, right, to potentially deny a claim. So I think it's really important, if we're going to do this right, that we invest in state employees to do it. We add the PINs necessary to be able to, administer the program and use it as an opportunity, even in unemployment insurance. The skills for adjudicating a claim or assessing a claim and UI won't be all that different from the skills of, assessing a claim for family. We can certainly cross-train employees here so that we don't need to take large PIN reductions when one claim, may be down versus another. So, these are all ideas that, we hope to have the ability to work with the new administration on. But I think it is, important that we look at a new policy decision besides privatization. We should be supporting jobs right here in Maryland and union jobs. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on right now to the Department of Information Technology. Patrick Frank is the analyst and Secretary Katie Savage. We'll do the analysis first.
Okay, for the budget of the information technology, the first page is the cover page that shows spending in the year that was, the year that is, and the year that will be. As you can see, there is a $35 million decline in spending. Most of this has to do with the way the major IT projects are budgeted. There's $46 million in fiscal 2023 for these major IT projects and reimbursable funds. The way it works is the IT fund gets general funds, and then it sends the money to the agencies to spend when they're ready to spend what's in the major IT fund. And so we have this very large reimbursable amendments in fiscal 2023, and they're not in 24. Eventually, we probably will get some spending in 2024, but it does make the budget look a little funny when you see that big decline. Once you take that out, it's about a $10 million increase, which is more in line with what's happening in other agencies. Since there are new members on this committee, I'll quickly go over what the agency does and what the different programs are. First, there is a chief of information technology. That's the secretary's office. The other key areas are security management. That's cybersecurity. There's application system management. That's running applications. That could be GIS, FMIS is the state's accounting system, budget systems, things like that would be running off of this. Web systems as well. There's also infrastructure, which would be phone lines, networks, and things like that they work. And finally, there's with the capital program, the radio control board and the interoperability radio system. That's a 700 megahertz system that's statewide for first responders. On to MFR. On exhibit number 1, as you can see, these are the indicators. A couple of areas are a little bit of a concern. First, one of the key things is to have employees doing the right thing, so to speak, that they are not have dangerous and improper practices. And that's how a lot of cyber incidents happen through phishing and things like that. And so training is a key part of this. There is some things we'll talk about in issue number 2 that these are a bit lower than they should be, the number of people that are compliant with the training, but there are some things that the department will be doing in the future to improve that. Second thing is the endpoint and the critical patches. That was pretty low in the last few years. That needs to should also be improving. Second, MFR indicators has to do with the major IT projects. As you can see, the trends up in the percent of projects that are on time. We still have some ones that are late in the last year, but it does seem to be moving in the right direction. Third is support services. That's basically, the day-to-day operations for a lot of agencies are getting. Some agencies like transportation have their own IT shop, but especially for the smaller agencies, provides the services of the agencies. Don't have to worry about it. They just go through to do that. This has performance indicators, basically about workload. What we've asked for and what they're working on is to get kind of value indicators. Are we paying too much for this? How efficiently is this being provided? The agency is working on that and expects to have some indicators next year. There is a deficiency appropriation, $250,000. It's for a system, the one-stop for Department of Environment that will be moving from the vendor to do it to operate that. Let's see, spending. Exhibit 4 kind of shows these different agencies that are within Do It, the different programs. 40% of the spending is the major IT program. Another 20% is infrastructure. Then the applications that I mentioned earlier is 14%, 12% is overhead, secretary's office, chief of staff. Cybersecurity is 9% and 5% is radio. So this is a kind of a breakdown. You can see where most of the money is spent. Interesting, page 5, exhibit 5, this has spending by object. 11% of the agency's budget is employees with salaries and benefits. The 82% about is contracts. This is an agency that does a lot of work through contracts, and contract management really is key for this agency to be effective. Final pie chart is exhibit 6 here. What this shows is kind of the orangish is operations and the bluish is the major IT fund. For a lot of these, like for infrastructure and applications, most of their money is reimbursable funds that are paid by other agencies. They do get general funds for overhead, and also in the new legislation, cybersecurity now will all be funded through the general fund. The concern was that they want to make sure that agencies have sufficient cybersecurity presence in their budgets, and they don't look at that as a way to cut costs and things like that. And so by funding it through the general fund, then there's then the agencies presumably will get a bigger share of the cybersecurity funding. Also, excuse me, as I said earlier, the major IT fund gets most of its funds through the general funds. Excuse me. What happens though is when projects finish, there's usually a little bit of money left over at the end. And the policy for the last 20 years, excuse me, has been to when a project is done, the department can take those funds and reappropriate them as special funds. And so that $7 million, $6.8 million precise, is basically old projects that are done that they're using for new projects, but they do have to reappropriate them so that you can see what is happening with that money. I'm going to skip through this next one. This is the standard where it goes chart, is details about how the budget is changing. If you have a question, I'll answer, but in the interest of time, I'll move past that. There are some new positions in this budget. 20 of them of the 23 are cybersecurity positions. What's interesting about this is they all have exactly the same classification. Now, when the fiscal note last year for this is to address legislation, had a number of different positions. And the reason I think these are all the same now is that the department is doing a study on capacity. Excuse me. And what it is once they have that study done, they'll probably reclassify a lot of those positions to be more in line with what their needs are, but they're keeping them there. And I suspect a year from now they will be in the classification which they need them. The next chart is a little bit interesting. I know that this is a big issue, and that's vacancy rates. Do It used to be about the highest vacancy rate across state government. If you go back to 2019 and 2020, it was about almost a quarter of positions were vacant. I know this, the chair, I'm sure will remember this. And there was a lot of effort and encouragement was given to, including restrictive language, to try to reclassify positions, and because one of the main concerns was low salaries. But an interesting what has happened is look at it's below 10% now. I never thought I'd say this, but Do It's vacancies now are below the state average. And that is like I said, I never thought I'd say that. Exhibit 10 provides some insight into why this is the case. What's happened, and I went and I looked at the 2021 positions. So this would have been, what were people classified 2 years ago? And they've been encouraged to reclassify positions. And then I compared it to what are the classifications in the budget that is being proposed right now. And as you can see, the higher the number, the higher the grade, and the higher the salary and classification. And so it used to be the median classification used to be grade 18. Now the median classification is grade 20. Also, you can see in the higher grades, there are much more of these positions. So this suggests that salary can really make a difference with respect to vacancies. The next section is about the nuts and bolts of the major IT fund. A lot of this is due diligence to make sure that the dollars add up. I'm going to skip over these charts. If there's any questions, please see me. I will gladly answer them. This first one is just a summary of spending. Then there's that $6.8 million that I mentioned to you about. This accounts for that. Interesting, Exhibit 13 shows spending over the last decade for the major IT. And what you can see there is it was about $20 million a decade ago. And in the last couple of years, it's been over $100 million. This has expanded tremendously. There's a lot of legacy systems that are being replaced, and that is really a big driver of all of this spending. Also, it's gotten more complicated. There used to be an exhibit in this analysis that just covered the 10 projects that there were. There were 31 projects, which takes a long time to review, I assure you. And it's an appendix in the back now, but there is information about all of the different projects in here, and so a status report on what they are and any issues and concerns that we have. But I will not go through that, but it's in the appendices in the back. Now, highlights from my review of the projects. There are still 4 projects. These are all new projects that don't have the information technology project request or ITPR. The way this works is an agency needs that for a major IT project. It has a lot of information about what the project is, what the solution is, concerns that there are, what the funding is needed for it, what the timeline is, all that kind of information. Agencies put it together. It's reviewed by information technology. I'm sure there is a document out there that is an ITPR for these 4 projects. It's just that my sense is that DO-IT hasn't really released it yet. It's not there. It hasn't come along far enough. So we're encouraging them to have those ready soon. Then I'm going to skip all these. The projects, there are a number of projects that are delayed. I'll skip that in the interest of time. We do have recommendations on a number of projects. The 2 health department projects are the recommendation will be in the health department budget, and these are projects that don't have the ITPR that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to ask for quarterly reporting on those. Similar situation with the State Board of Elections. Also, elections has struggles to do information technology projects. The 5th one there is the controller's integrated tax system. That is such a large system that touches so much that we just put, that's just standard annual language that we put in just to give us updates on it, just because of the breadth. A similar situation is the financial management information system replacement. That's the accounting system. There's a lot of agencies that care about this a lot. Obviously, the controller's office, the treasurer's office, general services, procurement, transportation, and these. So this is really a larger effort that right now DO-IT is heading. I mean, this is a project that hopefully will have good governance, because when you have that many cooks in the kitchen, you need a way to get them to all cook together and work together. And so we will ask for some quarterly reporting on that project as well. There are 2 projects where we are recommending some reductions. Department of General Services has their AS400 replacement project. Basically, that's AS400 is an old mainframe from the late 80s that's being replaced. Like I said, a lot of legacy system work is being done here. And that's kind of an operational system for that department. This is the project that a year ago did not have an ITPR when it was new, and we just got it in February. So we're concerned about how slow this project is moving. We're recommending that we move the funds. It's going more slowly. Interesting situation, the health department, there's about $50 million. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know much about this, the programmatic aspects of this, but there's a Maryland AIDS drug assistance program, which gets money. It's got a $50 million fund balance and has for years. There's about $3 million for this IT project. It qualifies. So the idea is use the fund balance in that project for the state's share of the funds for this project. And then, and so we're recommending reducing the general funds and then substituting the special funds instead. So that should not affect the project, except for where it gets the money, because we think the $50 million fund should be used. Okay, the first issue, there was a lot of cybersecurity legislation, 3 bills, 92 pages altogether, that really changed a lot of how cybersecurity works. I'll just cover just a few of these bullet points because I'm aware of the time constraints that the members have. This first one about clarifying and expanding responsibilities for the State Chief Information Security Officer, and OSM is the Office of Security Management. That's basically, if you will, I think of it as do its to-do list. These are the kinds of things that they should be doing now that based on the legislation. There will be also additional reporting. DO IT has put together a form and some guidelines about what should and what shouldn't be reported, so that all cybersecurity incidents in Maryland, whether it be state or local, now go through and are examined centrally through this Security Operations Center. Let's see what else is interesting here. There's going to be more regular assessments from third parties on our systems to check cybersecurity. And okay. Yeah, I guess I mentioned there is a report that they're going to do to see how to, as they're ramping up, because they're going to go from what is it, about 10 positions to over 30 positions. So there's big changes are happening as this is centralized. There's also, in the other bill, there is a local cybersecurity investment fund. The way that's going to be funded initially is through the dedicated purpose account. There is an oversight commission that of a number of different cybersecurity experts that will kind of guide this process of cybersecurity in Maryland now. There was a 20% spending requirement in the 2024 budget that came out to $152 million. The administration put that in the dedicated purpose account where it can be withdrawn as needed. That is probably a reasonable approach because we're not sure what these costs are going to be yet, and to have them there and then take them when they need them is probably good. Let's see. Those are kind of the keys of this. The new spending, as I said, there's $152 million. There's $3.5 million for the salaries that I had just mentioned also. And some of the other things that they'll be doing are also going to be funded through the dedicated purpose account. Then with that, I'll quickly a summary of what's happened with the dedicated purpose account so far. It got $220 million before this year. The first parts were all for assessment and stuff like that. We did get those last two in the spending line, the 36 and the $58 million. These are amendments that just were came to us in January. And what they're doing basically is do its own cybersecurity work, and like the work that they do for state agencies that sign up for their operations and stuff like that. They'll have some spending there. Kind of one of the key things that they're doing, I think that's kind of interesting, is the state is moving in cybersecurity towards something called zero trust. The idea here is that there are more the admission, or excuse me, that's the word I'm thinking for, access, or what you can do. And things like administrative privileges are more limited now. The idea is every time you get into a module, they check the credentials on people to make sure that you should be or you're allowed to be in there and all, instead of just, it's kind of, if you think about it, if it's like a hotel, you have a lock at the front door, but every room has a lock too, and not everybody has a key to every room. Also, you can do things like like if the pool closes at 10 o'clock at night, even if you're allowed to go to the pool, they won't let you go at 10 o'clock at night. And so that's kind of, in my mind, how I look at this kind of approach. And to do that, you're going to need to buy obviously more sophisticated software and have this. And that's kind of a lot of what this money is going to be spent for. Another thing for the statewide cybersecurity remediation, as I mentioned earlier, that the training isn't as high as we would like that number to be. Well, there's about $14.5 million in this budget that is going to provide employees, security employees, essentially in the agencies that are going to work with the agencies to try to have the highest standards and stuff like that. And so they are addressing it with personnel, if you will, boots on the ground within the agencies to try to improve the state's cybersecurity presence. There is one last thing I'd like to point out about this. In the dedicated purpose account, there's still there's still another $60 million that's identified. We haven't seen the amendment yet, and that is to continue remediation for the health department's cybersecurity incident. I mean, there was $40 million last year. So this is $100 million that has been spent. Also, I saw last year that something like 5,000 laptops had to be replaced. The point of this is that if you ask, why do you spend so much money on cybersecurity on the front end? Not only is it to keep data safe, but it could be very expensive on the back end if things go badly. Next issue is this is a question that comes up every once in a
Patrick, hold on just a second. You're looking like you have a question, Senator Benson. Do you? No, you're just listening intently. Okay.
One question that comes up fairly regularly actually is with everybody or so many people teleworking, what do we have in place to make sure that it's done safely? There is so what the agency did is they had what they called their workforce enablement project. The idea for this project was to see, if you will, if they can build a better mousetrap to make him see what they can do to do a pilot program to see how they can improve the remote work. The conclusion was that there are some things they can do differently, but they weren't appreciably better. So they're kind of pivoting this to kind of what as I said earlier, to kind of moving to that zero trust. So here the idea is instead of building a better mousetrap is, can we think of a better way to catch the mice? And so this is back, and this is a lot of the stuff is that zero trust I had mentioned earlier, and try to get software and try to get better control of those kinds of issues. And the final issue I will make about has to do with one of the vendors for I think I said environment of, I think it's DNR's one-stop portal. The vendor went bankrupt. It was purchased by someone else. I think Ernst & Young purchased it. And since we have so many contracts and these are all private people, bankruptcy is a real thing. It's rare, but it obviously happens. And so guess this is kind of late breaking, but we do have some questions for Department of Information Technology here on page 32. And that is, with this bankruptcy, what costs or delays were because of this? Did it affect services? Did it add to cybersecurity risk? Are other applications supported by the same vendor? Is there proprietary information there that's going to make it difficult to run this stuff moving forward? What's the long-term solution? When Ernst & Young purchased this, purchased the vendor, is this a part of their permanent portfolio, or is they are going to move it along as well? And what does DoIT do to manage these kinds of things? Because we always want to say, hope this is the last time it ever happens, and we do, but this can happen. There's a lot of vendors out there, and with that, I'll just mention that I've already talked about the recommendations. Most of the back of the bill are the appendices providing more detail about projects. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and take questions.
Great job, Patrick. Secretary Savage, you want to come up to the table?
Hey, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Katie Savage, Acting Secretary for the Maryland Department of Information Technology. I'm joined by our Deputy Secretary, Melissa Lehman. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony to this committee. I'd like to thank Patrick Frank for his diligent work in this analysis. During the last year, DoIT has been able to showcase its ability to support our sister agencies with efficient and effective internal IT operations, keep the state IT infrastructure secure, and roll out crucial technological solutions that focus on improving interactions between citizens, businesses, and their government. One of DoIT's and the Moore administration's main goals is to strengthen the state's cybersecurity posture, as you heard from Mr. Frank, while also solidifying its ability to manage and minimize the consequences of future cybersecurity incidents. We have made great progress with this goal in the last year by simultaneously implementing many of the requirements of the cybersecurity legislation that was passed in 2022, which include hiring a director of state cybersecurity and director of local cybersecurity, establishing the Maryland Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the MDISAC, to support collective defense, creating the Maryland Local Cybersecurity Collaborative in an effort to support local governments, issuing cybersecurity incident reporting requirements for state and local governments, the implementation of a governance, risk, and compliance module, and continuing our great progress on the assessments and penetration testing of Maryland systems. As you are aware and heard in the testimony, a large portion of DoIT's budget includes the oversight and management of major IT projects. This includes 59 projects, many of which include upgrading legacy IT systems so that state agencies can more effectively and more securely serve the citizens of Maryland. We expect this number of projects to continue to grow over the next few years to keep up with the evolving IT landscape. DO-IT is also continually trying to improve how we provide everyday, high quality and efficient IT services to our sister agencies while increasing transparency regarding the cost of those services. We are in the process of soliciting a contractor to do a comparison of DO-IT IT service rates to industry benchmarks, as well as developing performance metrics to measure workload and efficiency related to DO-IT IT services. I'm extremely excited about the progress this team has made in the past year, and I look forward to tackling the work that our team has ahead of us to continually improve the state's overall information technology environment. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the committee? The only question I have is, why is there no signal here on this campus? My cell phone is working worse now than it ever has since I came here. I get no signal. And I think it's probably my synopsis of it is that we have so many people in this building using technology that it's just overwhelmed, but I've never had it be so bad as it is right now.
Yeah, we've been hearing that as the number of secretaries step into their buildings. That's the most frequent question I get from incoming secretaries is we don't have signal in our building. I think that's not part of DO-IT's portfolio right now. But I think we probably do need to take an action regardless to see if there's something that we can be supportive of.
That would be so nice.
Because we are hearing that pretty frequently.
Bunch of whiner legislators as
No,
well.
it's the secretaries, honestly, that are saying, I just stepped into
Sure,
my building
sure.
and I have to go down to the basement. And so we do need to look into that.
Thank you.
So,
I don't think we have any other questions, so.
okay, great. No, I'll just say, I know we spoke about this and, in addition to digging into some of the contracting pieces and making sure that the big technology projects we have are in progress, cybersecurity will continue to be a focus. And then the last piece I really want to introduce is more the innovation side of the house,
Yes.
is how we can be more of a partner to our agencies in developing solutions going forward. So that'll be something new that I look to bring.
Exciting work.
Yes.
Yes, for sure.
Great.
Thank you. I'm glad you're there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Okay, committee, we're finished for the day.